we haven't had the chance to meet, my name's Drew, and I know we just got a chance to talk through the Q&A of us church planning, but we got to be here last year, and it was a huge honor just to get to meet some of you guys and to be back in the room with you. I thought I'd just take a second and just introduce you to my family. My wife, who was not here last year, we actually took this photo in Austin, like a week after. This is outside of the pizza place on Congress. And the reason is because at this event last year, we found out that our pizza party was welcoming a bagel bite. And so we found out we were pregnant, and so none of you knew this. So a lot happens in a single year. And so we have added an addition to our family, and we have a 4-month-old named Matilda. We call her Tilly. She looks like a Kardashian, and so it's a lot like her mom. But so a lot's changed, and we were a year into being in San Antonio, and now we're 2 years. But I'd love to just kind of share a little bit of our story. And then in our time together this morning, I just want to really answer one question. And the question is, who are we asking to be the missionaries? Like, ultimately, who are we asking to be the missionaries? And I started following Jesus late in high school. So my family, we would go to church here and there. We're this kind of Easter, Christmas people, and we'd go. And here's the thing: what's interesting is the church that was just like a mile down the road that we would go to once a year, twice a year, was a Southern Baptist church. And many of you know this, that if you go and visit a Southern Baptist church one time, your name gets put on a roster and it's there for like ever. And so when we kind of faded out, I was in high school. We had a new youth pastor that moved in and started with a youth group of 2 people. And because my name was on that roster, he literally would go door to door knocking. And so came to my house, knocked on the door, and was like, "Drew, we'd love for you to come to our youth group." And when you're high school and you don't want to do something, you're like, "Yeah, I'll be there." You just don't show up. And so that's kind of what happened. And then he came back. And true story, I remember telling my mom, I was like, "Just tell him I'm not here. I'm going to go hide in my room." And the guy came back for a 3rd time and was like, "Drew, hey, listen, just forget the event. What if you and I just go grab lunch?" And I'm like, "Heck yeah, man, all about free food." And he sits me down, and in the very first time in my life, I heard the fullness of the gospel. That he shared with me who Jesus was. I remember just at some point in the conversation, he just asked, he said, "Drew, what do you know about the Bible?" And I was like, "I think Jesus is the main character." And he's like, "Well, very good." And then he just asked me if I'd want to hear it. And I was like, "Why not?" And so I walked away from that interaction thinking, I'm not so sure about this Jesus. Like, it feels like a fairy tale. It feels very crazy, but maybe. And this gentleman named Danny Simpson would step into my life, invite me into his home. He had 4 kids, all under the age of 10. And he let me begin to just do life with him. And he showed me what it looks like, to be a father that's spiritually there, that's emotionally there, that's actually physically there. That he just began to pour into me. And it'd be several months later that after a conversation and a late night on a bathroom floor, went back to my house. Parents were out of town for some reason, overwhelmed. I remember running into my bathroom, falling on my knees and just bawling, asking God for the very first time in my life to rescue and save me. And then this gentleman began to continue to invest in my life. I'd go off to college, and it was crazy. And some of you know this, and this is a weird thing to just like tack on because I feel like it's like an episode of Lost that poses more questions than answers. But for like the last 15 years of my life, I've spent traveling as a full-time magician. Just a side note, you can think about that later. And so started traveling in college, and so graduated and had this moment where I was like, do I go off to get like grad school because it's the psychology degree, you kind of have to, or do I just hit the road and start traveling? And so got in a car with a guy named Josh Martin who played the acoustic guitar, and I did card tricks, and we're like, let's just see how far this goes. And so we started off in South Carolina and just started making our way west. And we thought this will last over the course of the summer, just a few months, and then we'll go get real jobs or go back to school. We'll see how this happens. And it lasted 1.5 years. Like, we just toured America, stopping at just churches or events, a lot of junior high boy lock-ins, just whoever would let us share our gifts and talents. But about 1 year into it, we started getting to the point where we started realizing that God hasn't called us to be these gypsies for Jesus. that he hasn't called us to just kind of blow in, blow up, blow out, and just host this event, watch God do something cool, and be like, peace out, we'll see you on the next trip. That God had actually called us to invest our lives somewhere, to plant the roots really deep, to make disciples. And that was really hard to do when you were only in a place for 2 or 3 days. And just as a side note, it's really easy to act like you have all your crap together when you're just in a place for like less than a week. And we started desiring something more. And so we're in Washington State. We're passing through. We're performing at the Washington State University. And we meet this guy named Keith who's running a college ministry of like 30 people. And he's just like, we're literally at a Denny's. We're about to leave the next day, and we just start dreaming. He's like, what if we planted a church on this university that went after the college students? Pullman, Washington is like 30,000 people. They count the college students. There's about 25,000 college students. I mean, it is a college town. And for some of you, I know you've visited. I mean, it is literally, it's like the Shire and the Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's a small town with this massive university. But Washington State is considered the most unchurched state, and college students the most unchurched age group. And we're just like, what if? And so God had already been stirring in our hearts, so we're like, well, let's do this. Why not? So the three of us, we moved there, we really just started doing life with people. And then 9 months in, this church went public. And we had absolutely no idea that it might actually work. We had people from Idaho that were driving across the border to be a part of it. So it was like within a year, we're like, I guess we should go plant another church. And so then we sent a team to plant a church in Moscow, Idaho, at the University of Idaho. And then we just began to develop these college leaders, and then we just began to send them out. And over the course of the 10 and a half years that my wife and I were there, we got to plant 10 churches, all on college campuses. So this is in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And so and that's kind of where we left. We felt God was stirring something new in our heart. I had gotten to the point where I had developed enough leaders that I was like, hey, you can kind of do this without me. You don't need me. And there's maybe a new work that God's doing. And so like I mentioned with Pastor Scott moving to San Antonio and just going, hey, what if we could do what we did in the Northwest in Texas? Because the thing was, I felt like, and I think it's the same thing with you, Mark, people go, Iowa, that's the anomaly. That'll never work in Texas. That doesn't work in the South. Of course, all the heathens that are up there in the cornfields, it's the same thing. It was like the Northwest was unique and special. And so we kind of had this, what if we could do the same thing in Texas? And what if it worked? Because if it works here, then I think the rest of the nation begins to go, okay, we got to do something with that. We got to do something with that. So we joined Community Bible Church, which is the most generic church name ever. And just this, like I said, seeker-sensitive megachurch with no mission, no discipleship. And just the church planning was, they had tried it one time, but it was really just pop-up overflow rooms across the city. And so we moved there and we just started doing it. And that's kind of been our journey in our life. And like we shared earlier, we'll plant in September. And so, but here's the question, and I share all that because I want you to kind of see a little bit of the background. That in all honesty, and I'm saying this not in false humility, to stand up here, I really am not sure exactly what it is that we did that worked in Washington, and I'm really not sure what we're about to do in San Antonio, if it'll work. So I'm not coming up here as this expert. I think I have a lot of experience and probably a lot more things that I know what not to do when it comes to college ministry and church planning. But God has allowed us to be a part of some really cool stuff, not because of how smart we were or how strategic we were. We saw God move and we just kind of stepped into it. And I think that's been my prayer for myself, my wife, my team, and I think for you guys, that God would allow you to be a part of a ministry. He would allow you to be a part of a church that we would see it grow, that it would expand, that you get to watch people go from death to life, that the family would increase. But that it would happen in such a way that Lifeway would come to you and go, we need you to write a book on how in the world this works so that we could replicate it. And you go, you know what? It's going to be a really boring book. Because here's what we did. We prayed a lot. and then we listen to what God said, and then we tried our best to be obedient to it. And that's it. Maybe you could squeeze that into 3 chapters, but they'll be a page long. So that would be our heartbeat. We go, it's not because of how smart we were. It's not because of how strategic we were. And we should be wise. We should be smart. We should be strategic. All of those things. But that we really would lean into the Holy Spirit and go, God, what are you doing? Because God cares way more about your university students than you and I do. Way more. And his strategies are way better than ours. And so there's a beauty in this and cross-pollinating, learning from one another, but also by being sensitive to the Spirit and go, God, what are you doing in my context, and what do you want to do? And so as we answer this question, who are we asking to be the missionaries? I want to just read Romans 10. Very popular passage, probably have it memorized, but I'll read it for us. In verse 14 it says, how then will they call on him whom they've not believed? And how will they believe in him who they've not heard of? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Now, just that point, we're on board. Drew, how in the world can they call upon the person that they don't believe? How can they believe if they never heard? And how can they hear unless someone tells them about it? Yes, 100%. But a lot of times this is, I think, where we stop. But verse 15, it says this, and how are they to preach unless they're sent? Unless they're sent. As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. That what we see in Romans 10 is simple. That God has given us a message. He has given us a story to tell, and then he's given us the assignment to go and tell people about it, that we are all sent. As followers of Jesus, every one of us is sent. Now, I don't have to convince you of that. You're bought in. You believe that. At least I hope so. But the question that I want to answer, who are the missionaries? I think we all default, if we raise our hands, I think we'd all go, yeah, Drew, we are the missionaries. Drew, we are the sent ones. We have the mission. We have the assignment. But I think sometimes, and this includes me, we look at our philosophies of ministry. We look at our calendars. We look at our budgets. And sometimes it doesn't really highlight that we believe that. That when it comes to who is the missionary, a missionary, if you look at it this way, a missionary is just someone who crosses cross-cultural barriers to enter into a place that they're not super familiar with. They're the one that crossed the barriers. That's what missionary's job is. But if you think about it, many of us know that we should go and tell, but our philosophy, our budget, our calendars communicate that we're not really a go and tell ministry. We're more of a come and see ministry. Come check us out. Come see what we're doing. And this is just what I want to submit to you, if that is our philosophy, then what we are asking is we are asking the lost world to be the missionaries. That we have pawned off our responsibility and said, no, you cross the barrier. You cross the cultural barrier and you come to us where it's safe and comfortable. And you be the missionary. Like if you just sit and think for a second, like church as just an event, it's a really weird thing for lost people. I don't care how amazing, and we should. Listen, side note, you need to hear me say this. Like I said, we're at a large church. Like I'm a big fan of the gathering, and I think we should do things with excellence. Like we don't lower that. Like we should give God our very best. And so from the music to the production, it's a creative element, art, like all of that. So please don't hear me push us away from that. But it's not sufficient. You can't build a foundation just on that. Because if you think like walking into a room where you've got people raising their hands like they've all got questions, they're singing glorified karaoke with words on a screen, and then you got a guy that steps up on stage and teaches from a history book at best to them to try to inspire and affirm and encourage. Like it's a weird thing. that we're expecting lost people to step into our event, and maybe the music will be good enough, maybe the lights will be bright enough, maybe the videos will be creative enough, maybe the guy who steps on stage is inspiring enough that there'll be life change. And it becomes this field of dreams, build it and they'll come mentality. And that's, listen, real talk, that's the vast majority of, that's our default. That's what we've been brought up in. That's what we've been raised in. That if you have a big event, maybe if you get pizza, the youth will show up and then you can tell them about Jesus. It's this come and see mindset. But the problem is we don't see this in the scripture at all. Now, you could go, wait, Drew, time out, disagree. Jesus does say, come, follow me. Come and see. But I need you to know that in the context that he's inviting them into himself, into Jesus. And he meets them in their context, where they were, on a boat, or hanging out in a tree, or in their living room. Like that come and see is him entering into their space, their time, and inviting them to come. Now, sure enough, once again, there were people that were like, hey, you've got to come. Let's leave this house. We're going to listen, you can't even walk, so four of us are going to put you on a blanket, and we're going to put a hole in the roof, and we'll take you to go and see Jesus, no doubt. But I need you to know it went straight to Jesus. That it wasn't an event to just hear about him. It was straight to him. And those are limited situations that obviously we see in Acts 1. Jesus gives them the commission that you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. You're going to go. And when you don't go, when you stay still and you hope that the nations will come to you, then that's when the persecution happens to get the salt out of the salt shaker. And God sends them out. Acts 2, even this is so crazy. And I've never seen this before. Most of my life, when I was looking at Acts 2 and the church that meets around the table, doing life together, I always thought, once again, not anti-gatherings, please hear that. But I always thought it was like, hey, they met in homes and then they met in the temple courts. So that's it. So every single day they did life in homes and they went to church together. Life in homes and then church together. And then I started to realize that the temple courts, yes, they're a place of worship, but it wasn't a place of worship for Jesus. Those were Jewish people. They didn't know Jesus. The temple courts were, let's do a meal together and then let's go into the epicenter of our city where all of our lost friends are hanging out, and let's do life with them and tell them about Jesus. Let us be the sent ones, the missionaries. And that's just so intriguing to me, that this shift, and obviously we know Matthew 28, go. Not get them to come and see you and I. And many of us, listen, we know, I don't have to talk you into it, that in God's very nature and identity is his mission. That Jesus doesn't stay in heaven, in the kingdom of God, and go, hey, come and see me. That he's willing to leave his throne room and move into our trailer park. He comes to us. He goes to tell us the good news of the kingdom of God. I love this. Ed Stetzer would say, it's not the church of God that has a mission in the world, but the God of mission that has a church in the world. So the church doesn't have a mission, but the mission of God has a church. I just love that, which by default communicates that you and I are meant to be a church on mission, sent out to cross cultural barriers, to go to them. And so under the banner, I think of sometimes trying to reach the unchurched, that we spend so much time thinking up ways to make our sacred hour of Sundays or our midweek gatherings relevant to the lost so they'll want to come and watch our event. But the question that I think we have to answer is, do we really think that our events will impress the lost world? Can we really compete with Coldplay and Need to Breathe and Taylor Swift on Netflix? Can we really do that? And if we do it well enough, will it impress them enough that they'll want to be a part of the church culture? And I think the bigger question is making them church our actual goal? Is that our goal? Like where's there a win? Like they go, if we can just get a bunch of people in a room, it's packed out, it's high energy, then we won. If we can just get them committed to coming to the event, we got it. Jackpot. And none of us, listen, none of you, if we did surveys, would say that that's your heartbeat. But once again, we look at our events, our calendars, our schedule, and we can tell what we really value. And we see the philosophy of our ministry and whether or not we are a come and see or a go and tell ministry. And it answers the question, in your city and on your campus, who are you asking to be the missionaries? And so I want to give us just 3 practical pieces to kind of help. And I'll say this first. There's a phenomenal read. I strongly encourage it for anyone who loves, college students and want to do college ministry. So whether you're the college pastor or you're a student, there's a book called The Fuel and the Flame by Steve Shadrach. Many of you like this. It's to us, it was kind of like, I remember the first coming across, I was like, this is the Holy Grail. Like this has everything you need to know about ministry. But he uses his example, and I'm just going to trust him. And so if the stats are wrong, it's not me, it's Steve. But he said that, and many of you have heard some version of this, that if Billy Graham hosted an event every single day, and every single day he preached the gospel, and every single day 10,000 people go from death to life, say yes to Jesus. He said it would take him 1,200 years for the entire globe to say yes to Jesus, not accounting for, obviously, growth. That's crazy. 1,200 years, which obviously that wouldn't happen. You can't live that long. But then he said this, if I share the gospel with you, and for one whole year, just 1 year, you're all I invest in. I make disciples of you. And then at the end of that year, we both leave, sent out, going to the campus, and we select one more person. And you select one person. For that whole year, we disciple those people. So at the end of year 2, your impact is 4 people. Like that's it. 2, like really 3, I guess, new followers of Jesus and yourself. 4 people. But he said if you keep that rhythm up, where every year you select one person, and that person at the end of the year you send out to do the same. He said, you will have discipled, not just shared the gospel with, you would have discipled the entire globe in 37 years. 37. That's a huge difference to 1,200. And obviously, we see that this was Jesus' heartbeat and his model as he selects 12 teenagers and said, 3 years, I'm giving you everything I got. And then after this, I'm going to release you, and you 12 will flip the world upside down. Like, that's crazy. Like, Jesus took 12 teenagers that he invested his entire life and ministry in. He completely empowers them and releases them to do it. And these 12 guys, 11, and they added 1, so we're still 12. These 12 guys really did believe that they were the sent out ones. They really did believe that they were the missionaries. And Jesus took 12 teenagers and he changed the world with those people. Like literally changed the world. Like if you've thought about this, like every single one of us in this room are a direct result of one of those 12 men. That they led someone to Jesus and discipled them, that discipled someone, that discipled someone, that discipled someone, discipled someone, that finally shared with you the love of Jesus. And so my encouragement is may we be the sent out ones. And there's 3 really practical things. Okay? And the first step is this. When it comes to your students, you have to empower your students. Don't entertain your students, empower your students. If you do all, as ministers, if you do all the heavy lifting, I love, Scott Kindig says this, that we end up dwarfing the reach of our people. That we end up like essentially, like we hold them back, but God has called us to empower. One of my favorite things about being underneath Scott Kindig's leadership, and probably the most frustrating thing about being underneath his leadership, is there have been so many times, because he's years ahead of me, he's done pretty much everything that I've done, and so I'll come across a problem, and literally I'll walk up to him and I'll go, Scott, tell me, what do I do in this situation? And his answer every single time is, what is God telling you to do? And I'm like, that's not what I asked. I came here for advice. Tell me what I should do. And he goes, has God told you anything? I'm like, no. And he goes, well, let's take the rest of the afternoon off and you go home and you spend with Jesus and see what he tells you what we should do in this situation. And if you don't hear anything, come back and we'll chat. And I was so frustrated, confused. And I remember the first time he kind of pulled back the curtain. He said, Drew, he said, the reason I do that is because, one, we hire staff that we believe can hear the voice of Jesus and be obedient to it. And we raise up students and we raise up leaders that we think can hear the voice of God and be obedient to that. To not just do what we want them to do. They don't serve us. They serve alongside of us. And that's just shifted so much of my leadership to go, our responsibility is to empower students to be all that God has called them to be, not what we want them to be. The second thing is we have to release students. We have to release them. And part of that is, yes, we have to show them along the way. We have to essentially walk them through the leadership square if you've seen that and go, hey, let me show you how I do this. You just watch, okay? Now, I'm gonna do this again. This time you help me a little bit, okay? Hey, you do this. I'll help you if you need it. And then this last piece is you do it, and I'm here to cheerlead you and champion you. Now, that's a long process. And I know that as leaders, sometimes there's a fine line between delegating and abdicating. And we have this tendency to just go, you just do that. Like either we're going to micromanage it or we're just going to abdicate it. Just go, you just do it and hopefully it doesn't screw up. Let me know if you have a problem. Like that's different than coming alongside of them and releasing them. And like you're empowering them and releasing them. And then the third thing is we have to stay close. That ministry is filled with learning ups and downs. There's lots of trip ups. And we have to stay close to our people. And that's what Jesus did, is he's empowering them to do the work of the ministry. He's releasing them and they're coming back and they're like, oh, we were amazing. This is awesome. Or hey, we blew it. We were so confused here. He stays close and for 3 years he gives them full access to himself. And when it comes to sending out missionaries, I want you to know this. You will always replicate who you are and not what you know. That your leaders will do what they see you do, not what they see you tell them to do. And so if you're not leading the charge as a missionary, if you're not the one leading the charge to the campus, your students will never follow you there. When they only watch us host big events, then it communicates to them that when I get to your level, I'm just going to host more events. We should host little events. We joke all the time in our ministry that like the saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. You know what I'm talking about? That little idiom. And so it's like, if all you've got a hammer, like everything, doesn't matter what you're hitting, it's all a nail. And I think we've done that with, listen, not anti-Bible study. Love Bible study. We should study God's word. It's a great part of discipleship process. But it's funny when you talk to most college ministers and you go, how are you going to reach athletes? And they're like, athlete Bible study. Great idea. How are we going to reach the sorority girls? Sorority Bible study. How are we going to reach fraternity students? Fraternity, Bible study. How are we going to reach freshmen? Freshman Bible study, but in the dorms. Like it's like our only move. And if we're not careful, it's still come see. Come see. And you can even tell, like I said, talking about move in and inviting people, like when you're on first day of school, freshmen are moving in and you step in there and you're helping them move in. My number one question with pastors is, what do you in that moment invite them to? Because the answer to that question tells you whether or not you're asking them to be the missionary or you're the missionary. If you're there inviting them to your midweek gathering, not a bad idea. It's a great strategy. But you're communicating to them from the very beginning that we host events and you should come to our events. It's a small shift when you meet freshmen, when you start to invite yourself, when you start to invite them not to an event, but you start to invite them into your life, or better yet, you invite yourself into their life. And just as practical as watching a freshman put together an Xbox when he moves in, you go, bro, that's legit. I'm swinging by tonight, we're gonna play some games. Like those little things of going, I'm inviting myself into your world, into your sphere of influence. I'm not trying to pull you out of your world into mine. And that's a subtle difference. And you model that and you send your people. And so listen, that's my hope. That's my encouragement to you. I want to show you really quick a short video of what God allowed us to do in Washington State and seeing the impact of kind of how it all played out over just, 10 short years. And it's obviously it's a movement that's still going. And we've got big plans for the future for the Pacific Northwest. But take a look and you can see what it looks like to empower, release, and then really stay close to college students.
You never know when God is going to speak. Moses saw a burning bush. Paul was thrown off a horse. We were in a football stadium in the third quarter of the Washington State versus Oregon game. Surrounded by 20,000 cheering college students, I sensed God say, look at all this potential. I want to do something here, but you have to think bigger. Truth is, our vision was a stadium full of saved people, but God saw a stadium full of sent people. We just wanted to start a college church, but God desired to start a movement of collegiate churches.
On August 19th, 2007, in Pullman, Washington, a part of the country where churches are few and college students in those churches are even fewer, we launched Resonate, targeting Washington State University. Within a year, we planted again at the University of Idaho. In 2012, we started our third site at the heart of WSU's campus, and it immediately became our largest Sunday gathering. 5 years after launching Resonate, we were a church of 600 people, 20 staff, and 3 sites. God was using us to reach the most unreached among the most unreached. We were being celebrated as a success story, and we were feeling the temptation to slow down and settle. But we couldn't shake that voice in the stadium saying, I want to do something, but you have to think bigger. Still not sure what think bigger meant, we committed to send out 2 of our best leaders, Jacob and Jessica Dahl.
In 2013, my wife Jess and I were featured at the Southern Baptist Convention in Houston as we prepared to plant at Central Washington University.
God used the convention and the relationships surrounding it to clarify the vision He had for our church.
I'll never forget our staff retreat that next year. One night, Keith had us open our Bibles to the story of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke 16, and we talked about our lives in light of eternity. Then the question was posed, if Jesus is precious, hell is real, and a choice is demanded, what does that mean for our church?
It means there must be urgency in our obedience. There must be boldness in our gospel proclamation. There must be multiplication at every level. Disciples, churches, staff, leaders, everything has to multiply. It means we must do whatever it takes to get the gospel to college students. Because there's nothing more powerful than the gospel, and there's nothing more strategic than college students being mobilized.
It was settled. We had a vision, and it was bigger than any of us imagined. Resonate Church, an urgent, multiplying, collegiate church planting movement, planting 21 churches by the year 2021.
The clarity of this vision has led us to mobilize our people. Since 2007, we've sent out 1,200 students on mission trips. We've sent a long-term team to East Asia to reach college students. Over 350 students have committed to church planting. Since 2007, we've seen over 700 college students baptized. The story doesn't end with the campus. It begins with the campus. Students graduate and move to cities as leaders. We are giving them a gospel worldview so they can shape and influence culture. If we win the campus, we win the world.
Sometimes we think we're too young, too inexperienced, too uneducated. But then we're reminded about missionaries who've gone before us. Hudson Taylor was 21, Lottie Moon was 23, and C.T. Studd was 25 when they sailed to China. and Adoniram Judson was 24 when he went to Burma.
We're seeing God raise up a generation of young missionaries who said, we will raise our own salaries, we'll transfer universities, we'll take classes from the field, we'll leave our friends and our families, and we'll do what's uncomfortable, what doesn't seem wise. We will do whatever it takes. The only thing we won't do is sit on the sidelines waiting to get old enough while a generation dies without Christ. Through the power of the cooperative program and the strategy of the Send Network, we are not alone in this work. Working together with Southern Baptist, our goal is to see all 403 major universities in North America with a local church on campus reaching students. Because college students plus church planting plus multiply everything equals kingdom movement. We don't believe we're special. We just believe it's our turn. Our turn to obey, our turn to be sent, our turn to do whatever it takes to spread the gospel, make disciples, and plant churches. Whatever it takes to make Jesus known in our generation. It's our turn.
God is doing something bigger, and we all have a role to play. The next time you see a stadium full of students, just think of what God could do if those students were mobilized for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah, there's really nothing special about us, but we just have this crazy feeling, or maybe question that kind of boils in our heart. Why not us? That God, you have a heart for the campus, and then you're sending students all over the globe. We have 80 countries, just at UTSA, in our backyard, 80 countries represented, many of them in countries where it is not okay to take the gospel. It's illegal to share the gospel. And they're in our backyard, and stats would say that 90% of them will never step inside the doors of an American home. And we go, man, send us, Jesus, we'll go. Don't have it figured out. We don't know what we're doing. Still feel young and dumb, but we're going for it. And I want to encourage you that whatever God is speaking to your heart, whatever he's stirring even in this past 24 hours, would you have the boldness and the courage to step out of your comfort zone and to be the missionary that he's called you to, and to go where he's sending you? And so I just want to pray to that end, and then I'll turn it over to Mitt.